What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from The Quartering, and part of me is really bummed that this video ended up coming out late on a Friday when I know viewership is always waning, but it is an important topic. It's a new level of restriction on what independent creators here on YouTube can cover, and it's important to you, the viewers. I hope that you'll take a second to make time in your day for this video and to consider sharing it around, because it's concerning to me. It really is. I mean, in a time where we know that there are fewer and fewer opportunities for independent creators out there to cover actual news, and there's more and more problematic news coming out of the quote-unquote trusted sources. And last week or late last week and into this week, there's been a wave of interviews done by Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, and she talks about how now videos or potentially creators themselves could be removed from the platform for not adhering to a specific source. If you are in disagreement with the source, you are likely to have your videos removed, and that's very concerning. We see here on Business Insider, YouTube CEO suggested content that goes against the WHO guidance on the COOF will get banned. This is a major problem because the WHO does not have a very strong history in terms of accuracy, and on top of that, it's also had a hilariously bad gaffe on this particular one. YouTube Susan Wojcicki has suggested that the video platform will remove content that contradicts the WHO. In an interview with CNN published Sunday, Wojcicki said YouTube would be removing information that is, quote, problematic, including anything that is medically unsubstantiated. Now, this is concerning because, well, mainstream media has absolutely been guilty of passing this type of stuff off before in the absolutely. And when we look at it, YouTube has people on here. I mean, I hate to be the look it up guy, but legitimately promoting drinking turpentine to cure illnesses, drinking, magnetizing your water, the power of essential oils. None of this stuff is medically backed, but YouTube doesn't have a problem with its existence. Now, you could argue that, that's because the demand for this content is low. Okay, maybe, but people are literally out there drinking turpentine because somebody on YouTube told them to do it. That seems very dangerous. She says, for example, content that claimed, for example, vitamin C or turmeric would cure people would be a violation of policy and removed accordingly. Now, I am not necessarily against maybe not removing it, but having a flag. You know how when we talk about the COOF, I mean, this video might actually get it. There's an information box below it, and it links to authoritative sources in their opinion. I would rather see that happen. Have YouTube suggest videos that debunk them. So like have Miles Power videos next to them, on these, a lot of homeopathic stuff. Now, this isn't to say that homeopathy is all quackery, but the fact of the matter is a lot of it is very, very problematic, as Susan Wojcicki would put it. She continued, and this is the quote that I have a real concern with. Anything that goes against the WHO's recommendations would be a violation of our policy, and so remove is another really important part of our policy. Well, it's interesting because when we look at this article from Wired, that says Trump is not wrong about investigating the WHO, a right-wing stunt to pin the blame on the WHO actually contains a useful notion. It goes to say Trump expanded his arsenal for dealing with the COOF. He went on to blame a bunch of other people. Okay, we know that Wired has a bias, but here's the issue. Before I get into the consequential misleading, let me lay out a larger reason that I think fellow global governments fans should consider getting an investigation on the WHO. Institutions of international governance, like institutions of national governance, are prone to a particular form of corruption. They are inclined to serve powerful interests at the expense of their own mission. For example, in 2002, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Pew-Pews and the international body that monitors compliance with it was doing something that John Bolton, then in George W. Bush's State Department, found annoying. OPCW's director was trying to get certain countries to join this, which would have subjected the country to immediate inspections. So ultimately, the Bush administration then used their clout to force Bustani out of office. He was replaced by an OPCW director less inclined to disobey America. Why was it important? Because if they had forced them to join, it would have led to inspections that would have made it obvious that there were no weapons to destroy, behind the whole reason behind the invasion. I suspect if Rick Scott had been a senator back then and had a prize of the Bush administration's intervention, he would have been less outraged than he is now. Which brings us back to the question of the misconduct of the World Health Organization. The basic allegation is that someone tried to cover it up, and the COOF outbreak and the WHO helped it to do that. The most damning piece of evidence is a WHO tweet on January 14th reporting that, quote, preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission. This came 18 days after a group of doctors notified health officials of disturbing clusters of the COOF, and 14 days after China's national government and the WHO were officially notified. It is really plausible that officials in Beijing or at the WHO still doubted that it was moving from... Is it really plausible that officials in Beijing or the WHO still doubted that the illness was moving from person to person? If you want to make a case for plausibility, here's what you would say. The New York Times has reported that starting in December, local officials, out of, quote, a political aversion to sharing bad news, withheld information about cases from the national reporting system, keeping Beijing in dark and delaying the response. And, quote, even after Beijing got involved, local officials set to narrow the criteria for confirming cases, leaving out information that could have provided clues that it was spreading. In particular, quote, hospitals were ordered to count only patients with a known connection to the source. The, quote, now infamous, quote, wet market, so every patient being counted would have, in theory, gotten it directly from food sold there. Indeed, so it is possible that both Beijing officials and the WHO officials actually thought that it wasn't moving from person to person, but I doubt it. Scuttlebutt around anecdotal evidence of human-to-human transmission is already spread well beyond their borders. Meanwhile, the WHO official who authorized the tweet could tell themselves that they weren't saying anything untrue. They were accurately relaying findings that had been reported by China. So I think the takeaway here is, meanwhile, the WHO officials who authorized the tweet could tell themselves that they weren't saying anything untrue. They were actually accurately relaying the findings of somebody who was probably lying to them. So the article continues, was the WHO in this scenario being responsible? No. But in trying to assess the degree of irresponsibility, it's important to look into the motivation. A common view is that it was bowing to China's power, but the fact that China isn't a huge donor to the WHO. In fact, it isn't. That's why some people who follow these things suspect that WHO's main motivation was to stay on good terms with China to keep it constructively engaged. After all, in 2002 and 2003, amid other issues, China had been egregiously derelict, and so far its performance with the COOF was better, most notably in the promptness of notifying the WHO. So, again, was the WHO trying to be nice and placate so that they could continue to get information? Okay, but what good is it if that information isn't correct? And does this one, crazy instance mistake necessarily mean that, for sure that the WHO is untrustworthy? No, of course not. But the problem is is they made a pretty egregious mistake and communicated what can only be described as fake news. And to then come in and say, you have Susan Wojcicki saying that they've increased overall usage of YouTube has skyrocketed in recent weeks, according to Nielsen. Overall, streaming videos time has doubled in recent weeks compared with the same weeks in 2019. YouTube accounts for about 20% of streaming minutes. So in the first full week of April this year, with most of the country hunkered down, Nielsen counted 32 billion minutes worth of YouTube streaming time, up from 15 billion the same week a year earlier. Hey, and as YouTubers, the CPMs are in the tank, but I'm glad that a bunch of new people are finding my channel. And when we see even this video shared by Mark Dice, interestingly enough, YouTube Susan Wojcicki says that they've boosted views on mainstream media channels another 75% this year so far over quote-unquote regular YouTubers. Now, I think it's reasonable to say that, just some Joe Schmo off the street isn't necessarily more credible than CNN in most cases. But then again, it's not like that's a hard and fast rule. Independent news coverage already has to deal with the fact that we get no chance in the search algorithm. Independent news coverage already has to deal with the fact that we can't run ads on the same things that our competitors do. And that's a big deal, right? That's a huge demotivating factor for a lot of YouTubers. It's like, do I want to cover this topic where I'm guaranteed to make no money, or do I want to just cover something else? Make no mistake about it, that's there on purpose. They're removing the incentive to cover that for individual content creators. And now with Susan Wojcicki coming out and saying, if you're going against the WHO, then your videos are likely to be removed, I would just offer that evidence that the WHO does not have a great history of being authoritative. In fact, they have a history of several times acquiescing to world powers and fudging facts and bending the knee. So they aren't an unbiased news source. They are just as easily bought as anyone else, which would, in my opinion, make a strong case for allowing independent coverage of it. At the very minimum, it was bad enough when you refuse to let independent creators run ads on this stuff, but now you're talking about giving out channel strikes and removing videos on top of it. That's a ridiculous double standard that you don't hold. You let late night show hosts cover it. Why not let somebody in their basement who does the proper coverage, or really anybody? What's the difference between a newsreader, a comedian, and an independent creator? Oh yeah, I forgot. It's not YouTube, it's ThemTube. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll talk to you again real soon.